Hi everyone, welcome back. This is my first quarterly reading wrap up of 2026. Instead of doing a giant reading wrap up at the end of the year like I did for 2025, I thought I would split it into quarters, so 4 times throughout the year, as I don't actually read that much, but this way I feel like I'm able to talk about the books more and in more depth rather than just skimming past them at the end of the year because I've got so many to get through. I'm aiming to make this shorter than my reading wrap up of last year, however, it seems I have made a lot of notes. For this quarter, I feel like I've really found my flow of reading. I think as much as I really enjoy like thrillers, horror, I do need to break it up a little bit because reading such intense horrors back to back can be a little bit too much, especially that I like to read before bed, and yeah, reading intense horror before bed isn't the nicest way to fall asleep. So this quarter I read 5 books in total and they are all 3 stars or above, so it's a really solid start to the year for my reading. How I rate books is a 3 is I'm glad I've read it but I necessarily wouldn't pick it up again. A 4 is so close to perfect, there's just a few things that maybe I wish was different, and a 5 is absolutely no notes, perfect. So the first read of the year was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller, and I give this a 5 out of 5. The book is, I would say, sort of romantic historical telling of the story of the Battle of Troy and the events surrounding that leading up to, and it follows the story of Achilles, who is the son of a king and of a sea goddess, I believe. And so he's already set up for kind of this legendary status. And when it comes to the Battle of Troy, he's kind of asked to prove that. His friend Patroclus, his friend, oh, this is going to go on forever. His friend Patroclus, I'm just going to say it like that, I don't know if that's right. He was exiled at a young age and was, I guess, forced to be taken in by Achilles and his family. Out of fear and love for his friend, he decides to join him on the excursion to the Battle of Troy. I am not aware of any Greek mythology, really, and also not of historical events. That's kind of really not my thing. So I was really pleasantly surprised by this, and that I actually wanted to read more of this genre. I don't know if it was obvious from that beginning that I really struggled with some of these words and particular names. I fumbled a lot over them and I was getting kind of fixated on the pronunciation a lot when I was reading, so that kind of took me out of it a little bit because I was trying to concentrate so hard on them, and it got to the point where I just kind of gave up, and halfway through the book a name would crop up and I'd be like, who's that? Because I couldn't actually take it in that that was their name. Obviously this cannot be helped. It's a historical event, like Achilles and such were actual people in Greek mythology, and yeah, that cannot be helped. They cannot rename the characters. Obviously it's Greek mythology. That's a me problem, not a problem of the book. So that's why it didn't really impact my rating of the book as such. There is such a contrast between the two boys to me, and even a contrast between in themselves. There is one boy, Patroclus, that I don't know if you could really call him an aggressor, because the incident that made him be exiled isn't, I don't know if it was an accident or, things like that, but it's not written in a way that makes you think he's aggressive, but that's the way his story started out. And then as the book progresses and he kind of grows up, he becomes a lot more softer, whereas Achilles is described as this really angelic boy. And as he grows up and has this kind of ego forced upon him, you're the son of so-and-so, you need to lead us, you need to do this, you need to do that. As this is kind of forced upon him as he's growing up, he kind of not slips into it, but I think it gets to him a little bit that he's like, right, I need to step up, I need to be this guy. And it's nice that with Patroclus that doesn't really matter. Like, he sees him for who he is, not his status. I think they are both very, very complex characters. They both have this kind of moral battle amongst themselves, within each other, of, you know, death, what's right and wrong. And it really takes you on that journey with them. Like, a lot of times they seem to be challenging each other, but they never question each other's integrity, which is really nice, especially in a romance. I did find that I was getting a bit irritated with Patroclus towards the end. Like, he's had the opportunity to step up, become this man, you know what I mean? And obviously that's not me saying that, that's kind of the way that the time period is set. And for a lot of the story, it seems like he is just too timid. I think his past mistakes have kind of traumatized him that much that he just lives, and he's happy to live in the shadow of Achilles just as long as they remain together. However, the book did prove me wrong, and he does come into himself. And when I read that part of the book, I was like, yes, like, I've never rooted so hard for a character. I really, really just enjoyed the way that he is written. It is just such a tender love story, and yeah, I just loved it so much. I've never read a romance that's made me feel that way. However, I will say some of the description is next level. Like, I am a fan of horror, of gory things to read. There was one description of like one of the battles or whatever, and it said that, I think it was Achilles, had gone to collect his arrow from whatever was stuck in this poor man, and as he pulled it out, it latched onto one of the ribs. Yeah, that was TMI for me. That was, I read that before bed as well, and then I just felt a bit queasy, to be honest. I really wanted to read this for a long time, but I was kind of afraid of the genre. It's not something I normally read, so it put me off for a little bit, but I am so glad I read it. I enjoyed it so much, and it was such a good book to start off the year. Someone has just decided to mow their lawn at this exact moment, but I'm really confused because there's no lawns near me. There's no gardens, so I really don't know how this lawnmower can be that loud. But anyway, hopefully you don't hear it too much in the background. The second read of the year was Hiiiiii by Ottessa Moshfegh, and I gave this a 5 out of 5. I was pleasantly surprised by this one because I didn't really rate my year of rest and relaxation all that much, but this just feels so different. Like, her style is the same, but the story is just great. The book, I guess, is a psychological thriller, and it follows the story of Hiiiiii in the perspective of her retelling her 20s. She has a job as a prison secretary in a prison for boys, and also spends most of her day daydreaming or taking care of her seemingly abusive and alcoholic father in their really run-down home. However, one day a new prison staff named Rebecca comes onto the scene and changes her life essentially, and leads her into a spiral of crime. In judging Hiiiii's character, she comes across very cold. She is very regimented and, you know, really knows what she likes, what she dislikes. And it kind of seems really disconnected and out of touch, like she really does daydream a lot. However, there is some slight emotion when it comes to the boys in the prison. Like, there is very slightly some sympathy there. Off the bat, her meeting Rebecca is obsessive. She becomes fixated on this new person, and she really hones in on how it feels to be an insecure person, and the way that it's pictured is that Rebecca doesn't make her feel that way. However, she is desperate to impress her, and everything that she does around Rebecca is very calculated in the way that she acts, presents herself in order to get her attention or to impress her. I really like how Rebecca is written. You really get a sense of like the command that she has when she enters a room, and this is not nearly remotely close to how she is portrayed in the book, but I imagine her as the vixen from The Chase. She is not described in any way like that, but I just could not get that image out of my head. Like, that's how much aura she has when she enters a room. But then again, is that true? Or is that just how Eileen perceives her? And my girl Eileen, she is an IBS girly at heart. My goodness, the way she describes her bowel movements. I shouldn't find it funny because it kind of is in a harmful way. You know, it kind of touches on eating disorders and things like that. But the way she just describes them is so funny. And I think that's what kind of lets you in a little bit to her character. In the end, I kind of had conflicting feelings for Eileen and the situation at hand. Like, I wasn't sure if I pitied her or had sympathy for her. It's very clear that her behaviours, the way she thinks, is trauma response. So in that way, I did feel sorry for her. However, on the other hand, it's like she curates and scripts every meeting, everything that interacts with another person in her head to such an extent that if someone goes off script, it's almost like that's it. The you know, like, no one can ad lib. Like, she cannot have a natural meeting with a person, a natural discussion. She has thought everything through prior to that. So if they don't stick to the script that she's invented, she's not interested. Again, I think it is a trauma response and a disassociation from her actual real life. The way that she kind of lives in this make-believe world of her mind is a way to detach herself. I could feel such a tension nearing towards the end of this book. Like, when I had a few pages left, there was such, an atmosphere of tension. But as it's written from Eileen in the future, you kind of know that nothing's gone horribly wrong. You know what I mean? She's still alive and well, as she describes. And I actually read a really interesting review about this, and it was questioning whether Eileen is actually a reliable character, if she's a reliable narrator, because she describes so much make-believe within the story that maybe that didn't actually happen, or maybe that she's writing from a place to make it seem like it's all better now, but it actually isn't, and that's her way of coping again. But I will say, please check the trigger warnings on this, because the situation at the end is horrific in the description, and it is a really, really tough thing to read. So that also made me question the review of saying, is she reliable and has she made this up? Because who would make something like that up? Or who would, maybe the situation did happen. And also, maybe it's a way of her passing the blame. Maybe she's describing the story to paint herself as not in the same light. You know what I mean? I'm trying not to spoil it too much, but it is a really, really good book, and it's a really good book to think about. The way I kind of read it and then looked at the reviews and thought about the narrator and things like that really reminded me of how you kind of analyse books in English in school. It was really interesting. 5 out of 5 read, but please check the trigger warnings on that one. Let's move on to the next, which is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman. I gave this a 3 out of 5. Sorry. For me, it just did not live up to the hype that I'd seen on TikTok. Now, don't get me wrong, this book makes you think. Like, I was analysing this, annotating like crazy, but I just don't know if it's the genre for me, and that's why I didn't really feel too attached to it. This read is a dystopian novel from the perspective of a girl who is nameless to us, and essentially she's kind of been brought up in captivity. We don't know the events that led to this, but there is an underground bunker with a cage holding 39 women and 1 child hostage. They have no concept of time, of their previous lives, how they got there, and the girl is essentially outcasted as she has no prior knowledge. She doesn't really know how to read, how to speak complexly like the other women. She doesn't have any skills. However, one day there is an incident that leads to their escape, and it turns out this girl is the key to survival in the plains surrounding. To me, it's a pretty philosophical book straight off the bat. There isn't really a storyline, which I usually like, but this one, there is literally nothing going on. And it's a really, really good book to pick apart and analyse. I made so many notes reading this for a relatively small book, but I will just stick to the main points that I kind of picked up. I found the aspect of time in this really interesting, and how they navigate that, not knowing what time it actually is and how they can work that out from their bodies. The girl cannot also understand fear, as she has just been in one place all her life. What has she had to fear? And it's really interesting because, is that a bad thing? Is it a good thing? And I think when it comes to the survival aspect, it is, because she's kind of the one that's pushing forward to do all these things, because she has no concept of that feeling of dread or like what's to come. She's just neutral. But then on the same hand, it's not like she's emotionless. And I think the way that she's been brought up around these women has impacted that, because she sees those feeling emotion and it kind of influences her without her realising. But this story really made me deep about animals in captivity, you know, especially really smart animals like orcas or dolphins, how they must really sink into a depression. And I think obviously SeaWorld, if you've seen those orcas, their dorsal fin is kind of bent, which means if they're in captivity and they kind of get in a depressive episode, I think their dorsal fin dips. Don't quote me on that, again, I'm not a scientist. That's just vaguely what I remember from visiting SeaWorld. But to be such an intelligent animal and taken from where you belong, I can't imagine or grasp the depression that you would feel. Whereas those animals that are bred in captivity, they know no different. So there is such a contrast in that. And this is essentially what's happening to these women. There are women who have no recollection or memory of how they got there, but they know how to live. They remember how to cook food. They remember their skills, compared to the girl who must have been brought into this cage at a young age, because it's only women in there. She can't have been born there. She doesn't know any different because that's her environment. And it really shows the contrast of environment versus upbringing. I think it's like they usually refer to that in like child development, I think, don't they, where it's like how your environment impacts you compared to how your I don't know if that makes sense. But one thing I thought that was crazy, it really, really hit home when I was reading this part, is that they're discussing the toilet, and when they escape they finally get privacy again. They kind of set up this toilet in a bush so no one can see them, whereas in this cage they're forced to just go to the toilet in front of everyone because there's nowhere to hide. It's just one square cage. And it really makes you think that privacy is so key to feeling human. And yeah, that just really got me, because you just don't imagine, you know, I'll go to the toilet every day, think nothing of it, but when that's taken away, it's so impactful. Like, I can't imagine how that must have felt. Similarly to the toilet situation, the girl describes having a bath alone, and she has never experienced solitude in her life. She has never for a second that she remembers being alone. And all of a sudden, with the escape and, you know, out living in the wild, they come across a lake to bathe in, and this is her first time being by herself. And the way she describes that is just, yeah, it got me a little bit emotional. A few more quick fire things that really got to me were the narrator kind of describes their life as very routine based, and the way she kind of words it is that she never had the experience to learn anything that wasn't a necessity. So she kind of learned how to survive, you know, how to speak, how to eat, things like that. But when she sat talking to the women who have clearly had past experiences of either work or just life, she's never had the opportunity to learn that. Another thing is that survival is a village. I think to survive purely alone is quite difficult if you are not resourceful. And when it comes to describing the women and their survival in the plains for so long, it's really how they help each other. Like one person has this skill, one has another. Obviously the girl has use behind her, so she's stronger, she's quicker, and all of those little elements really come together to kind of keep them alive, essentially. I think this is a given for this book, but I found it very slow. There are times that, yes, it is really deep and it is a bit, whoa, but a lot of times it's just kind of repeating itself because it's going on for so many years. It's just, it just feels a bit samey sometimes. I read something and I feel like I read this like 10 pages ago. Again, I don't know if that's the purpose of the book, to really like drill it in that there's nothing there. But for me, even though I'm one usually for character development over storyline, I just felt like there was nothing going on. Again, with the way that this book makes you think, I could see this being used in A-level English for you to annotate. Like, it's crazy. It really, really, every page, every other page, there is something to sit with and be like, really deep it. Another little thing I really enjoyed is that the author put the title of the book in without it being cringy, and I just thought it was perfect. I love it. I love it when a book has the title used in it, but sometimes they just make it so blatantly obvious that it a bit icky, but the way that this was put in there was lovely. So yeah, that was my 3 out of 5 review for I Who Have Never Known Men, and I feel really guilty about it. Maybe I do need to kind of read it again and sit with it, but yeah. Next we are on to The Lamb by Lucy Rose, and I gave this a 4 out of 5. This book is sort of a coming of age gothic horror with a touch of fairy tale in it, which I really, really like. The book is from the perspective of Margot, who lives by the forest with her mother. In the book, she does refer to her mum as Mama, but I just can't say that. I can't do that. But it is kind of a manipulation tactic of sorts to kind of keep her childlike and innocent. So I do understand why it's done, and it makes a lot of sense, but I just, for the sake of this video, can't say it. They live in a rundown cottage waiting for hikers who are lost on the trail to come and knock on the door and ask for directions. And it's these people that their mum refers to them as strays, and they take them in, keep them happy, and ultimately eat them. However, one day a stray named Eden shows up and really switches up the dynamic of the household. I found the scene setting in this book so good. The way that she describes kind of like the mold and mildew of the bathroom, ooh, I could just picture it. Like I was there, I could taste it, you know what I mean? And I just thought, yeah, the description in this book for the scene setting is amazing. I really was engrossed in those kind of moments. However, one thing that kind of took me out of it was I was really confused about the time period, and I have seen this in reviews before I read it, and I shouldn't have looked at those reviews because I didn't want to be influenced. However, it is quite obvious. I was really confused. It normally wouldn't bother me, but it was majority of this book. Like the language was very old school, like oldie worldy, which again is done on purpose by the mother to keep her in this kind of fantasy dream like perfect, like picture perfect family, which is very much not the case. And it is actually addressed further in the book that this is used as a form of manipulation. I, in my head, as I was reading, was convinced that this was set in the 80s, and I did some research afterwards and it's actually set in modern day. I didn't get that vibe, but then again, it is set in Cumbria, and I've never been there, never had any understanding of the place, so I think that this like descriptiveness is very location based, you know what I mean? Like I was convinced we were in 80s America. No. way away from that. We were actually in Cumbria in the modern day. I really thought I had the twist sussed out. Like off the bat, I was like, I know what's going to go down here, and I was wrong. So that was nice, even though what happens isn't nice. But as soon as the twist came to light, it kind of lost impact for me. Like, I wasn't really a fan of the perspective change. Let's just say that. The short chapter lengths made it so easy to read. It was so digestible. Like, I wanted to keep reading and reading. I didn't want to put it down. And even though there was so many of these short chapters, I felt like they were all necessary. There wasn't a lot of filler in there, if you get what I mean. And I'm going to leave this review on this note that the day I finished this book, I had pie for tea. So, what does that say about me? I think it really shows how good Lucy's descriptiveness actually is. And finally, we are on to the last book, which is Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier. I gave this a 3 out of 5. The story is from the perspective of Griet, a young girl who is to leave home and become a maid for the painter Johannes Vermeer. She ends up becoming a muse to the painter, and scandal kind of erupts from this when she is asked to wear his wife's pearl earring for a portrait. I'm sorry, but the first few pages of this book gave me the vibe of those fanfics that were like, my mum sold me to One Direction kind of thing, you know what I mean? Or like, I was to become One Direction's maid. I'm sure that was a fanfic somewhere on Wattpad in like 2014. But yeah, straight off the bat, that's the vibe that I got. I went into this wanting some fluffy kind of romance that, you know, the maid falls in love with the wrong person. And as much as that is true, it's not really written about. And I guess that's because the author has to be really, really careful here, because these are real people. The girl in the portrait, her identity is unknown to us, but it is suspected that she could be a maid. She could have been, I don't know, someone in that household in relation to the family. I think it was like a distant cousin or something. And obviously the painter is real. He's a real guy. The painting's a real thing, and you can't rewrite history. So I do understand that the author has to be very careful of what she says. Each chapter is written as the span of a year, so I think there is actually only like 2 or 3 chapters in this, but it just went on too long for me. For a year, I mean, I understand, but some of it wasn't needed, you know what I mean? You could cut out half of the things that were written about. Yeah, not much was really going on in these very long chapters, really. This is the epitome of slow burn. Like, over 2 years, you've literally had one conversation, looked at each other twice, and now you're his muse. What? But you know, could have happened, we don't know. It's interesting to see how scandal was kind of portrayed back then, and how the different classes kind of integrate with each other. As a historical book, I really enjoyed that aspect, but the concept of the situation with the painter and the muse, it could have been so much more, but again, you've got to be careful. But yeah, I just didn't have enough behind it for me to really get into that. Again, the ending was very sensible, but you know, if a maid ran off with a painter, I'm sure people would know about it. It would be in the history books, you know what I mean? As a historical book, I really enjoyed it. Like, I really enjoyed learning about those kind of relationships of classes, how it's kind of like a fly on the wall perspective of what it would be like in a painter's studio back then. I did enjoy all those kind of aspects, but for the romance side, it was just very lackluster, and I think so much more could have been done with it, but again, you have to be careful. That's all I really have to say, to be honest. Literally not much happened. So that was all my reads from January through to March this year. Thank you for watching this one. I hope it was relatively spoiler free. I actually tried to summarise the books myself rather than just reading off the blurb. I hope it made sense. I hope I did justice for these books, and let me know if you've read them and your thoughts as well, and maybe from this you are inspired to pick up one of these books. Honestly, for the first part of the year, this was an amazing read for me. I've never read so quick in my life. Again, thank you for listening to me ramble for a very long time. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully see you in the next one. Bye! Done.